Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming. Let me just share my screen and then we can get started.
One more thing,
All
this
right.
session is being recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube channel afterwards.
All right. Can you guys all see that? Hopefully. Good.
Yes, we
Okay, so great. So my name is Dr.Janiczek. I'm currently a fourth year anesthesia resident at the University of Illinois, Chicago, Department of Anesthesiology. And I'm also, like Dia said, CEO of Get Admitted MD, which we can get to a little bit later tonight, and then also the advisor of the Premed scene. Tonight, I'm here to talk to you guys about the medical school admissions process, kind of a timeline, what you should be working on, maybe at this point of the year, if you're applying this year, all those sorts of things. And so it'll be kind of a high level overview. And then I hope to come back at some point during the semester and maybe dive into personal statements or dive into letters of recommendation, something like that at a later point. So a little bit about me. I pretty much said all that. I'm originally from Iowa. If you guys haven't been to one of my sessions before, I went to the University of Iowa to study integrative physiology. And then I went on to study at the University of Iowa, Carver College of Medicine, where I graduated in 2017. And then now I'm up in Chicago, almost done with the residency. And then I'll be down in New Orleans next year for a fellowship in cardiothoracic anesthesia. So let's dive into it. So tonight we're going to talk about the AMCAS application, do a little intro into what that is for you that may not have known about that. A little timeline of the application process. I'm going to touch on all the components of the application process. So what goes into it, the MCAT, personal statement, the work activity section, letters of recommendation, secondary essays, interviews, and then a couple of ways to make this whole process a little bit easier for yourself. So diving right in. So what is the AMCAS application? So AMCAS stands for the American Medical College Application Service. Basically, this is a centralized application used to apply to a majority of U.S. allopathic medical schools. And so I say a majority because the Texas medical schools are on a different application service. They have their own. It's called the Texas Medical Dental or Texas and Medical Dental Application Service. And then osteopathic medical schools have their own application service as well. But they all function very similarly in terms of what's required and what they function as. So the AMCAS application basically has multiple sections. So, you have to fill out sections about your, biological information, where you're from, where you grew up, what high school you went to, all those sorts of things, to your grades in college, and which is separate from your transcripts that you'll have to send to the application service. And then also, your MCAT score will be included, obviously, and then personal statement, your letters of recommendation, everything like that is included in this application. The only thing that's not included is secondary essays, because those are very school specific. So you'll get to those after you submit your AMCAS application. And we can talk about that more later tonight. So timeline of the application process. So that's one reason, why this is a crucial time of the year to kind of start planning out your application if you're going to apply to medical school this year. I know it's only February, but it does come up quick. The semester will be over before we know it. And so having some idea of when you're going to work on these things is crucial. And so typically you start working on your medical school application the end of your third year. So the second semester of your third year going into your fourth year, because in June of your, the summer between your third and fourth year is typically when you submit this application and get the process started. In general, this application process can take over a year long. So if you think about it, the application opens in May. So the AMCAS application opens in May. You may not actually know if you're going to be in medical school the following year until the next summer. So it can be over a 12-month process, which is extremely grueling, extremely tedious, but it does happen. So setting yourself up for success early is crucial, and so that comes down to preparation, which I hope to help you guys out with tonight. So just a little bit of overview of the application timeline. So like I said, the spring semester of your third year is typically when you take the MCAT. Typically start working on your personal statement and then also start collecting your letters of recommendation. So then transitioning into the summer between your 3rd and 4th years, this is when you finish and submit your application pretty much early on in that summer. And then you can start beginning for other components of the application, such as secondary essays and interview and everything like that. If you haven't taken your MCAT by this point, you can also take your MCAT in the summer, maybe in June or late May of the year, so that your score will get back, maybe midsummer, end of July, beginning of August, and that's, a perfect time to, continue on with the application. And then kind of in the fall semester of your 4th year, that's when you receive your secondary essay invitations from medical schools. You write those essays, submit them, and then hopefully get as many interviews as you can, and then get accepted to hopefully multiple medical schools, but it only takes one to make you a doctor. So this process of getting interviews and getting accepted, that could be kind of the more time-consuming part, and that can actually stretch into the spring semester and even the next summer of the year right before you start medical school, depending if you're on any wait lists or anything like that. So let's dive into kind of the components of the application itself. So I mentioned the MCAT exam, so the medical college admissions test. So basically it's 230 questions in 4 different sections. So you got chemistry, or chemical and physical foundations of biological systems, the critical analysis of reading skills section, also referred to as CARS, the biological and biochemical foundations of living systems, and then psychological, social, and biological foundations of behavior. So with COVID, they modified the timing and the questions, the number of questions a little bit this past year. They're going to, to my knowledge, go back to the old system. And so it'd be 59 questions in each of the 3 sections except for CARS. And CARS will be 53 questions. And then you get roughly an hour and a half for each section. So if you think about that, 4 sections, hour and a half each, that does add up to a very lengthy exam. It takes up a good portion of your day. And it's a very tedious exam to take. So scoring wise, each section is scored on a scale from 118 to 132. So that means your total score can be 472 to 528. Obviously, you want to try to get as close to 528 as you can. However, the average for matriculants into allopathic medical schools, so matriculants are students who have gotten accepted. That is about 5'11". So if you're in the 5'10 to 5'15 range, you're in a good spot. If you're above 5'15, that's awesome too. If you're below 5'10, it's not the end of the world. You just have to apply a little bit more wisely to the schools that you choose. So how do you do well on this exam? So the first one sounds cliche, but basically you got to study hard. It's very crucial to set yourself up early for success. So make sure you have a plan in place, know what you're going to study, how you're going to study it, everything like that. There's a ton of information to know. And so, just taking the time to prepare is crucial. And the second thing is do practice questions. And so, practice questions are going to be a part of your studying process in medical school, beyond in residency, and beyond as an attending physician. That's kind of how we learn a lot of information and reinforce the information. So, I think being able to do practice questions is really crucial. You kind of get a sense of what they're going to ask, how they're going to ask it on the exam. And then, make sure that you can translate the knowledge that you have gained over the last few years in the classroom and during your study process into, being able to answer the questions correctly, because sometimes it's a little tricky to figure out what they're actually asking. And so the knowledge, it's just how are they asking it, and that's the hardest part. So try to get to as many questions as you can prior to the exam. Obviously that's a balancing act between reviewing material and doing the practice questions, but try to strike a balance and get as many practice questions as you can done. And then my tip number 3 is complete at least one practice exam. I would recommend multiple practice exams, full length ones if possible. The AAMC has a bunch of full length exams out there, and so this is really good just to figure out what your timing is, and make sure you can complete the sections on time. If you know you're a slow test taker, this is really good to make sure that you get through all the questions, before the end of the time for that section, because you can't go back to the previous section once you finished it. So, you got to get through all the questions, and there's no penalty for wrong answers. So therefore, if you don't, know the answer, at least put something down, because that's better than not having anything there. It would also, being able to do full length practice exams will allow you to get used to the testing environment. The computer systems for the practice exams are very similar to the computer systems for the real exam, so it can make you just more comfortable on the test day itself. And then it can also kind of identify if you get tired at a certain point during the exam. Maybe you need to drink coffee during a certain point, or drink water, or have a snack ready. It'll just kind of let you be more prepared for that. So here are some basic MCAT resources. You guys have probably known about all these. The classic ones are Kaplan, Princeton Review. Those are probably the oldest ones. Magoosh MCAT is a little bit newer, but they have a lot of great content out there on Instagram and social media and everything like that. And so they put up a lot of practice questions, a lot of topic reviews type stuff. So definitely check them out. And then my personal favorite, the one that I used when I was studying, was Exam Crackers. And so I think they really do a great job of simplifying things and breaking down concepts into a way that's digestible. Kaplan and Princeton Review are great. They're very thorough, but sometimes students can get a little bogged down in these because there's a lot of information to read through. Their books are very complex. And so a little bit easier way, to sometimes get the material is Exam Crackers. And full disclosure, I'm not paid by any of these companies. This is just my honest opinions. So. All right, let's move on to the personal statement. So this is a crucial part of the application as well. There's a character limit of 5,300 characters, including spaces. And you submit this along with your AMCAS application. It's just built into the application itself. There's really no direct prompt for this essay, other than why do you want to be a physician, or why do you want to be in medicine? Which makes it very hard to, kind of pin down what you should write about. So I find that a lot of students have a hard time picking a topic. And once they pick a topic, it's okay. They can get through this, but, just figuring out what to write about is often the most difficult component. So a little timeline for writing. So say you're applying this year, you're going to submit this summer, January and February, I often, say it's for the brainstorming of, kind of what are you going to write about? Is it a personal experience you've had with healthcare? Is it a familial experience you've had with healthcare? Is it a life experience you've had? You could have a combination of all three of those, but just start to get things down on paper, and kind of figure out what you're going to write about. Transitioning into February into March, this is the time to finish your brainstorming and actually start writing. And so, maybe the first 2 weeks of March, you're still kind of figuring out exactly what to write. But by the last 2 weeks of March, you've got a more formal statement put together. And that way by April, you can start reviewing and revising your statement and actually sending it out to other individuals to review. And so I would suggest, having maybe 5 to 10 folks read your personal statement. If you have more than that, sometimes it gets a little bit muddied in terms of, someone would say, okay, you should do this. And then another person would disagree and say, oh, you should do this. And you get conflicting, kind of advice. So try to limit it to maybe 5, even 8 people at the most. And that'll, kind of give you enough range in terms of, different opinions, but it won't be too many. And then, in an optimal world, you kind of have your personal statement done by, the beginning of May, even the middle of May. And so that way, when the application opens in May, you can't submit it until, the beginning of June or the last week of May, depending on the year. You'll at least have your personal statement ready to go. You can get it in the application itself. And then you won't need to touch it again. It's just one thing less that you need to think about. So some tips for a better personal statement. So first, try to brainstorm an experience that caused you you know, kind of that initial interest in medicine, or even a confirmation that medicine is the field for you. So this, like I said, could be a personal experience where you were the patient and you had a really great doctor that you worked with. You know, I've read really good personal statements that, you know, they had an injury, a high school sports injury, or, you know, just growing up, they had an injury, and, you know, the doctor, they formed a relationship with the doctor, and you know, kind of remembered that, and you know, that kind of sparked an interest in medicine. Other times it's your interaction with a family physician, or, you know, maybe your parents, you know, or grandparents were sick at one point, and you kind of watch them, you know, interact with the physicians, you know, taking care of them. That's, you know, always a, you know, kind of a great personal statement as well. Tip number 2, try not to restate your resume or your CV, your curriculum vitae, in its entirety. So that's one big mistake, you know, I see a lot of students make, is, you know, trying to basically say, you know, what interested you in medicine to begin with, and then backing that up with every activity that they've done since then. And so it's not meant to, you know, the personal statement is not meant to do that. It's meant to kind of highlight a couple of things, you know, maybe that you've a couple of activities that you've engaged in that, you know, kind of furthered your pursuit for medicine, but it's definitely not a place to kind of just restate, you know, I did this, I did this, I did this. You know, that's other parts of the application. And so, you know, it's okay to mention maybe 2 to 3 of those, and really back it up with, you know, this impacted, you know, this activity impacted me because X, Y, and Z. So, and then tip number 3, like I said already, have multiple people look at it. So 5 to 8 is generally a good number. That gives you a wide range of opinions, and then you can kind of boil it down, and ultimately it's your statement. So if you don't agree with what one of the reviewers say, you know, just, you know, kind of just go with what you want. It's your personal statement. So, all right, let's move on to the AMCAS work activity section. And so this is another place where, you know, I see a lot of students struggle a little bit, just knowing what to write, what activities to include, everything like that. So you can have up to 15 activities in this section. And so you know, like at the bottom, it says the old adage was to fill all 15 of these activities, you know, and make sure it looks like you've been doing a ton of stuff during undergrad. However, that's no longer true. And so the push over the last, you know, 3 to 5 years has been, you know, quality over quantity. So make sure your activities are really good. You know, if you did it for one day, you know, it's maybe not something, you know, you want to save for an entire activity. Maybe combine a couple one-day activities into, you know, one, and you know, write about them all at once. Each of these 15 activities, you have 700 characters to write about. You know, make sure that you describe the activity, what you learned from it, those sorts of things. And then each activity you can categorize the activity ranging from, you know, paid employment to volunteering to physician shadowing. You can have volunteering is even broken down into medical versus non-medical, and so on and so forth. There's a bunch of different activities, activity categories out there. And then you can designate up to 3 of these activities as most meaningful. And so what this means is that these are the activities that, you know, maybe it was something that was a little bit more longitudinal throughout your education. And so, you know, maybe you started at freshman year and you're still working on it as you're applying to medical school. And it's really impacted you on your journey to becoming a physician. You know, maybe it was just you know, could be a very short experience that was just very, you know, inspirational for you, or really just to confirm that you wanted to be a doctor, or something like that. You know, these activities, these most meaningful activities, do get an additional 1,325 characters to write about them. So you get a total of about 2,000 characters to write about these 3 activities. And so the extra space is really to, you know, show what you did and how it impacted you. So you got to be kind of careful which activities you choose, and you know, make sure that you're able to talk about them, you know, a little bit more. You may get asked about them during your interview process, because it does go on your application as this was the most meaningful activity, so they could ask you about them. And so that is a possibility. Moving on, so letters of recommendation. this is a very common speed bump in the application as well. So who to ask? So I generally advise 2 science professors, 1 non-science professor that pretty well. Hopefully you've taken multiple classes with them. Some schools will require the non-science professor, some won't. It's kind of nice to have in your back pocket, because once you get to the application, you can actually choose which letters will go to each school. So you don't have to send every single letter to every single school. You can make it tailored to whatever their requirements are. And then other than that, I would say 1 to 2 other individuals that know you very well. So these could be volunteer supervisors, employment supervisors, physicians you shadowed if it's, kind of a more longitudinal experience, so on and so forth. When should you ask these folks? I think March is a good time. That gives them about 2 to 3 months to get their letter written. So if they're a very popular person that writes a lot of letters for, not just pre-meds, but pre-dental students, pre-physical therapy, everything like that, it may take them a little bit of time to write the letter. So asking them in May or June is a little bit late. So I would try to ask them a little bit ahead of time. You can always, if they don't have the time immediately, they can always, write it at their leisure, and then just remind them when the application gets closer that they still need to, write the letter. You don't need their letter, you don't need every letter in there to submit your application. So, you basically give them a link when you create a little placeholder in the application for their letter, and then they can go up, they can upload their letter to the application directly, and so they can do it whenever they're done. How do you ask these individuals? The best way is probably in person, but given the pandemic and everything like that, emails are just as good. And so, they probably know that, if they know you well, they're going to know you're applying to, medical school or pre-professional school in general. And so they probably aren't going to be shocked by the fact that you're asking for a letter of recommendation. They probably know that it's coming at some point. So some just helpful things for you to provide them. If you have a personal statement draft, it's really nice to kind of give them a little bit extra information about yourself, and maybe why you're pursuing medicine that you may not have talked about before. And then also just a resume and CV. That's always kind of a nice thing for them to have, so that they can see what activities you participated in, what clubs you're a part of. All that kind of stuff can go into your letter that they write, and make it sound even better. So, all right. So now you got the application submitted, and now you're working on your secondary essays. So these are the essays that are sent to you by medical schools after they've received your AMCAS application. General time frame, you may get these August to December. Most of the time, it's a little bit earlier in that time frame. So, August, September, October is kind of the main time frame there. Depending on when you submit your application, everything like that, it's probably going to be more towards the kind of the fall months versus the winter months. Each school will ask you slightly different questions, and they all have different character limits and word limits. And so it's really important to pay attention to what those limits are. One may be, as little as 200 words, and then the next one may be, 10,000 characters that they give you. So it's just really important to know, what's the limit. And so, some common questions that they may ask you, why do you want to be a medical student at this school? That's a pretty common one. What unique characteristics or experiences can you bring to this medical school? So if you have a really interesting upbringing, or maybe a family experience that was really interesting, that taught you a lot, you can answer those, that question with that sort of answer. And then any sort of hardships you may have faced to get to that point of applying to medical school. Those are just 3 of the common ones. There's many others that they could ask you. In the summer, after you submit your application, there's usually a lag time of about 4 to 6 weeks in which your AMCAS application is being verified. And so what you can do during that time is start prepping, kind of stock answers for all these questions. And what that'll do is then, when you get a secondary essay later on, you can kind of just adapt your stock answer to, the character limit, the word limit, but at least you know what you're going to write about. So the turnaround time from receiving the request to submitting your secondary essay is going to be shorter. And that way, you don't delay your own application. So interviews, everyone's favorite topic. So basically, these can be offered anytime after you've submitted your AMCAS application, your secondary essays, and then paid any of the secondary essay fees that are associated with submitting those secondary essays. Invites can be sent out, basically between September and January. And so it really just depends on when your file is complete, meaning, you've done all the things for that medical school to offer you an interview. And then if they, want to offer you an interview after, review of your application. There's multiple formats available, maybe one-on-one, 2 faculty members to 1 applicant. I've seen that. I've seen 3 to 1, 3 faculty members to 1 applicant. Some medical schools do group interviews. Those are less common, especially during the pandemic and everything like that. And then you guys have probably heard of multiple mini interviews or MMIs. So basically those are a series of interviews that are very short. So maybe like, a minute 30 to 2 minutes a piece, but you may have 10 to 12 of them, kind of back to back to back. And so usually what they do is they have, a prompt and, they give you 30 seconds to think about the prompt. And then, in the old days before the pandemic, you would go into a little room with the interviewer and, just answer the prompt in that 1 minute, 30 seconds to 2 minutes. And then once your time was up, you just left and went to the next room. In terms of, post-pandemic, we can still do that with, Zoom and everything like that. So you may see it as probably less common now that, everything's on Zoom, but it's still, it's still out there. And then, just the last bullet point here, due to the pandemic, interviews were virtual this past year. I imagine that this, will continue for the time being until we get more, vaccinations out there and everything like that. So. All right, so wrapping up before the question and answer session. So how can you make this process easier? And so academic advising is one thing that I can offer. So we would meet 2 to 3 times a semester. We can discuss your current pre-med trajectory and kind of make sure you're on track to have a successful application. It's also great for underclassmen who maybe aren't quite ready for applying to medical school, but you want to, set yourself up for success later down the line. I've also created an online boot camp through Teachable, and so this is really supposed to be a guide to, what the AMCAS application involves, and then I've basically created a fake applicant in that boot camp, and I take you through the entire process with him based on my experience on the admissions committee that I served on during medical school and everything like that. So that's a really good resource for you guys. And then also one-on-one consulting. So, I can work with you on all aspects of the application, make sure your personal statements, up to par and everything else like that to make sure that your application is the best that it can be in order to succeed in the medical school application process. That's all I have for you guys. I'm happy to stay on here and answer any questions you have. I put up some of my contact information on the right here. If you guys are interested, feel free to email me if you guys have any questions. And then I would love to answer any questions you have now.
Feel free to unmute your mic, or you can ask your question in the chat.
Yeah, so the question is, what is your advice for high school seniors going into undergrad, and what should they focus on? Yeah, so that's a great question. In terms of, getting started in the undergrad process, the pre-med, kind of curriculum is a lot to handle at first. So really just settle into being a pre-med, learning how to succeed in those early classes. because success early on as a pre-med is super important, and it will, affect your GPA way more than if, you wait till, your third or fourth year and then, really try to kick it in. So, once you have a bunch of credits on board, as a junior and senior, it's harder to change your GPA. And so if you can start your undergrad journey on the right foot, having a great GPA, having a great study habits, those are things that, will mean more later on. There's a balance there between, getting started with a great GPA and then, making sure that, you do have some of those activities, to back up your application. So I usually say take the first semester of your undergrad, and don't do any, don't do too much volunteering, don't do too much, employment if you can get away with it, just kind of settle in and being, a college student, and that will pay huge dividends down the line, in terms of making sure that you set yourself up for success later on. What should I focus on as a sophomore in college in your spring semester? So this is the time when you should start, maybe getting a little bit more activities on your application. So whether that's, research, volunteering, if you haven't already, shadowing, try to start banking those hours. I know with the pandemic, it's incredibly difficult, but the virtual shadowing opportunities are very important now, and pretty prevalent online. So I would, try to get as much of those as you can, and try to, if there's a virtual research project you can work on, maybe it's a chart review project for a clinician in the field that you may be interested in, that's something to think about, or maybe it's a literature review on a topic you're passionate about. Those things will be good to put on your application. And at that kind of the second semester of your sophomore year, you should have a okay grasp of what to do to succeed. So now you start adding those those activities to your application, and that will give you enough time to work on them for about a year before you submit your application. And you could get a letter of recommendation from those individuals that you're working with, and it shows that you're dedicated enough because you put in a whole year on those. So.
Thank you.
What is your opinion? Yeah, no problem. What is your opinion on virtual experience coming from a person who rarely can leave the house due to the pandemic? At this point, I know my hospital, we don't even allow visitors, family members even, and so I think medical schools, for the next 2 to 3 years will understand, that the activities and, the experiences that Premed did before the pandemic are just not there anymore. So having virtual experience is really the best you can do. And so, I think just keep a log of all the, virtual shadowing you attended, maybe what specialties they were, everything like that. And so that way you can record that on your application later on. And so, I would just keep really good notes of everything that you've done, in terms of the virtual world. And so, make sure you can, when you are applying, make sure you can, kind of produce those, the number of hours you did, the shadowing experiences you had, everything like that. So. All right. If I'm taking a gap year, am I required to explain what I did in my gap year? So follow-up question to that, did you apply already, or did you not? Is this your first time applying after the gap year? Okay, I'll just take it as you didn't apply. Okay, great. So no, you don't necessarily need to apply, or you don't necessarily need to explain anything. The reason why I ask is if you did apply one time and then you took a gap year and then you applied again, the application will show the committees that you applied before, and then usually they ask, why, did you apply in the past? Why are you applying again, and so on and so forth. So if you never applied before, though, you don't necessarily need to explain, what you did. It may come out in the interview, because they can see like maybe when you graduated from college and then when you're applying and, see that there was a gap year there. But it's never, like a malicious thing. They just, want to get to know you and maybe figure out why you're, why you, maybe didn't apply the first year right out of college. But, I would say that there used to be this stigma about taking a gap year, and, every student would just go straight through, from pre-med to med school. And when you get on the other side, you kind of realize a lot of your classmates will, they have, medicine is their second career. They may have, taken multiple gap years. And those things aren't as well publicized, I don't think, as they should be. So it's totally okay to take a gap year. I think it's also from a maturity standpoint. You're going to be way more mature after taking the year and kind of resting. It was I had a gap year, and it was one of the best experiences I've had, just because I was able to rest and go from kind of the pre-med very rigorous schedule to a little bit more relaxed schedule for a year, and then I was able to jump back into med school, and it was a good experience. And so I actually, if you're willing to take one and want to take one, I would say do it. Just try to keep some sort of activities going, so you're not just completely not really doing anything to further your application. That would be the only advice I would have. If we had a really rough freshman year and due to classes like you don't have the above the recommended 3.5 to 3.7, but we really tempting to get straight A's in all the sciences with med schools. So a really high MCAT score would not be the only hope. So medical schools look at trajectory of the GPA as well. So if you did start a little bit low and 3.3, 3.4, your freshman year, that's no big deal. You can still turn it around and end up with, a 3.5, 3.6, even a 3.7, as you get further along. And so, if you have, maybe a bad first semester or a bad freshman year in general, you can still turn it around for the remaining time as a pre-med. And so they will look at that trajectory. So say you got like a 3.4 as a freshman, but then your sophomore, junior, and senior were all, 3.8, 3.9, something, in that range. They're going to say, okay, they figured this out. And so, they're going to look, less down upon that 3.4 your freshman year, because you turned it around, and that'll prove to them that you can handle the rigors of medical school. So, I mean, a great MCAT score would definitely help, but it's not like the only hope you would have. What advice do you have for discovering the medical field you are most interested in? So yeah, I would just try to talk to folks involved in, different specialties. We all have a little bit different, personality traits to them. Anesthesia tends to be a little bit more, relaxed individuals. They're a little bit more type B, kind of go with the flow personalities. And so, surgeons maybe on the other end of the spectrum there, a little bit more type A. They're kind of high strung usually. Internal medicine folks are, a little bit more like anesthesia, typically pretty, relaxed and easygoing. But they're a little bit more, I guess, cerebral, if you will. And so they like to just sit around and think about things and talk about things, where anesthesiologists like to just do things. And so every field kind of has their own little quirks. And so, virtual shadowing opportunities these days are kind of the best way, just because, you can't actually shadow. And so, once the real shadowing returns, hopefully you can get into some sort of, clinic or hospital and see some of the different specialties, and, really observe, how not only the physician interacts with the patient, but then also how the physician interacts with other physicians. You can gain a lot of information about, kind of what that specialty is all about just from those interactions. And so, try to go to as many of the virtual shadowing, opportunities as you can, and kind of get a sense of, if you would, be interested in that. Because I think the biggest thing for picking a medical specialty is just figuring out what you're interested in. And so, there's so many specialties out there that, whatever you're interested in, there's something for you. And so, just try to get as much exposure as you can to those activities or to those specialties. All right, next question. How do you make yourself competitive for a dual degree program? So dual degree, it depends on, I'm assuming it's MD, PhD, but I know there's, MD, MBA, everything like that. So, MD, MPH, MD, JD, there's a bunch of different ones out there these days. So, I think just showing an interest in, if it's MBA, maybe having a business minor would, kind of help and show that you kind of have a business, background and a business mind. If it's MD, PhD, it's really important to show some research on your application. And, most of those interview processes for the MD, PhD programs have some sort of research, focus to their interview. And so they really want to know that you understand the scientific method, you understand, kind of what goes into making a research project, and, they understand, kind of the rigors of the scientific research. And so I think just having some sort of background in whatever you're interested in, MD, MPH might be a little bit, you don't necessarily need to have a specific, background in public health. But for the more kind of competitive ones like MD, PhD, and, MBA, I would say maybe try to have some sort of background in it. And that way you can show them that, hey, I'm really interested in this, in this field alongside with medicine. And then, is the 2 science process for a strict rule or just a general recommendation? It's just a general recommendation, just because a lot of medical schools ask for 2 science letters. And so, I think it'd be kind of prudent to not have just 2 science letters, kind of in your back pocket. If a school only asks for 1, that's awesome. But, from all the schools that I've seen, just having 2 science professors is just going to be a better, kind of a, I guess, all-encompassing portfolio, if you will. And that will, make sure that you're covered at more schools, instead of having to scramble to find another letter, kind of once you realize that you need to. And so I think if you just have 2 from the start, it'll just set yourself up for, more success and less stress. Does it look bad if I don't have a doctor write me a letter of recommendation? I have heard a lot of people say that we should have at least 1. No, not necessarily. You don't necessarily have to have a physician write you a letter. Obviously it looks, it can look really great. It just really depends on who knows you the best. So if that physician, maybe you shadowed them for, a few sessions, right? And they don't know you that well. It won't necessarily help your application just to have a doctor's recommendation. It's really if you've worked with a physician, multiple days, over a long period of time, and they got to know you really well, those are the letters that will hold more weight. And those are the letters that will, definitely make it, a positive on your application. But just getting any sort of doctor letter is not necessarily, a necessity. Just because, if the doctor writes you, 2 sentences, they shadowed me for, 4 hours, 2 days a week for a month. It doesn't really mean as much as, if they really know you and, they can write, a strong letter on your behalf. And so I would just kind of go for more individuals who know you the best and can write, very good letters for you. All right. So back to the GPA question about the. Yeah, so if you end up with, 3.5 to 3.7 cumulative due to a bad first year, you still will have that upward trajectory. And so, you could, it'll still look good as long as you have that upward trend. That, that's what they, will look for in that situation. All right. What is your recommendation for a non-traditional student with years of experience in healthcare? Are the experiences required to be recent or consistent, or is it several, or discuss experiences that have been done with several years of anticipation? I guess it depends on what the years of experience are. If you're doing direct patient care or anything like that, as a nursing assistant or a medical assistant, anything like that, those are great activities. They may kind of wonder if there's a gap what were you doing during the gap in terms of experiences. But if you were, working and you had a full-time job and you're out of school, that's totally an acceptable thing. And so if you're at that point where you need to, kind of do life instead of, you're not in school anymore, that's definitely an acceptable, reason to maybe have a few less experiences on your application. But maybe, you work 40 hours a week, at a job, and that's, kind of taking up all your time. You can kind of explain that in your, your activities, the work activities section. You can just explain that, this is my full-time job. This is, unfortunately, I haven't had enough time to do, more activities. You could also tag it on into your personal statement as well, if you want to, kind of cover yourself and make sure that, there's no questions about that. When would you recommend starting research in college? So I would say during my sophomore year. A lot of times research, principal investigators want to know, that you've had some background in the topics that they're, talking about. So, I wouldn't start it freshman year. Junior year might be a little bit late, depending on, what kind of lab you get into or what kind of research you're doing. So I think sophomore year is a great time to start. And that way you have enough time to develop a rapport with your principal investigator. You can maybe get a paper published or at least a poster, published out of it. And you have enough time to get some meaningful work done. But it's not too early that you're going to distract yourself from, doing well your first year of undergrad. So I think that's kind of the sweet spot. And then, if you can get 1.5 to 2 years of experience in the research arena with that individual, that would be awesome. And they can write you a fantastic letter of recommendation, when you go to apply. That's probably when I would start. No problem. What other questions can I answer?
Hello, I had a quick question.
Sure.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm also a non-trad student, and I've been taking post-bac classes by myself, not in informally. And I was wondering, as far as the positive trends go, is there a number of units that you have to take in order to show the positive trends, or this just doesn't matter for those people who are taking post-bac classes by themselves?
Yeah, I mean, there's not really like a set number of, credits or anything that you need to, do well on. It's more just, showing, a trend in terms of, if you started a little bit lower in your GPA or your grades in general, just showing that you can, kind of make it a little bit higher in terms of, getting into, the 3.7, 8, 9 range. That's going to really show, that you can handle the kind of the curriculum and the rigors of medical school, because that's really what the admissions committee wants to know is, are you going to be able to handle medical school? And so that's one way that one thing that the GPA serves as is kind of a long-term measure of, can you handle the rigors of the medical school curriculum? And so, if you can get those higher grades, if it's, even if it's later on, I think that's the most important thing. And so there's really no like set number of credits or, even a set GPA cutoff, as long as it's kind of up in that upper 3.7 to 9 range, I think that's perfectly fine.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
No
Hello,
problem.
sir. So I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Yeah, so I'm taking OChem 2 this spring and would like to apply to med school soon. So my first question is, when is the earliest you recommend I take the MCAT in order to apply this year?
Sure. And so, OChem, I guess the other question is, have you done all the other prereqs?
Yes, that's correct. For
Okay.
my undergrad, I finished like my undergrad degree, and then after that, I started on the prereqs, like on each prereq.
I see. But have you taken like physics and all the biology, all the
All of
biology
them.
courses?
Yeah, all of them
Okay.
except biochem.
I see. Okay. So I would probably say, May or June, would be a good time to take the MCAT. The OChem knowledge is going to be fresh in your mind if you're taking it right now. And so that's, OChem is something that kind of disappears out of your brain if you're not using it. And so, if you could do it while it's fresh. I guess the other question would be, do you think you could commit to studying for the MCAT this next 4 months? And taking OChem is a beast in itself. So if you can feel like you can take the OChem, succeed and do well, and then also be able to study for the other topics, that would be a question that I would ask. And then if you say that you want to just focus on the OChem and knock it out of the park, then maybe July would be a better time to kind of take the MCAT, so that you have this kind of June to review everything else and just focus on OChem for now. And that's still not like super late in terms of the application, as long as you have like kind of everything else tucked away, your personal statements, your letters, everything else. If it's tucked away, taking your MCAT in July is not the end of the world, because you'll get your score probably in August, and you can actually still submit your application the first day in June or end of May, whenever it opens for submission. And you don't need your MCAT. You can just mark on there your date, your MCAT date, and it'll just automatically get uploaded when the score is available.
Okay.
So.
And actually ties into my second question about the biochem. Like, some med schools require it, so could I take that after I've already submitted the application?
That is a little tougher. I would try to at least like have it in, like, be enrolled in it when you apply, just because they'll they may wait for you to, for the schools that do require it, they may wait for you to be done with it before moving forward with your application. And so, I'd hate for you to apply to them and then have to wait on that. And then, you kind of get shuffled to the end of the, potentially the end of the, line for that school. And so, I would, if possible, try to take it, early, but if it's going to delay your entire application, what you can do is, submit it, and then you can always email the Office of Admissions and just kind of tell them your situation and that you're taking the biochem, and that may help your, oftentimes they'll respond to that and say, okay, we'll review your application, just keep taking the course when you're signed up for it. So that's an option too.
All right, thank you. So if I run into any other questions, would your email be the best way to reach you? Yeah, you can always shoot me an email. All right, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So the other question I got here is, how many months does it usually take to prepare for the MCAT? So that's a great question. It depends on if you're in, kind of a full-time, student mode as well. Then it's more on probably 3 to 4 months, because you can kind of chip away at everything. If you are not in full student mode and maybe it's over the summer, maybe you're graduated already, maybe 2 to 2.5 months of really dedicated studying, you can knock it out. But if you are taking a full load of classes, and especially if you're taking a lot of like science classes, pre-med classes, everything like that, it's going to kind of chip away at your time, and so you may want to spread that out over maybe a few more months. But generally, I'd say maybe in general 2 to 4 months is probably the most common time frame.
So we are going to wrap up at around 8 p.m. So Dr. Janiczek, you can answer one more question.
Sure.
I have a question.
Sure.
I already took a look at your online, at least I found the website that says Get Amid MD. And I saw like there were calendar and like we can do consultation or consult with you. Is there a charge to that? Because I was looking and I didn't see it. So like,
no, so the initial consult's free. And so what we can do is basically what we do is we get on a call, we discuss kind of where you're at, and then I do have distinct packages to work with me, kind of going forward. And so the first call is free, and so there's no charge to that. you know, I can give you, you know, a little bit of advice on that, and kind of see where you're at in terms of, you know, what you've done with the things that I've talked about tonight in terms of the components of the application. And then, you know, if you want to keep working with me, that's when, you know, we talk about, you know, the cost.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So I'll actually throw my Calendly in the chat box. So if you guys, you know, want to schedule a meeting, you can always check out my Calendly and schedule a call, and we can see how we can help you with your application. So that is the link to my my Calendly. And so, you know, I hope, you know, you guys, you know, if you want to have a meeting, feel free to schedule one. Other than that, I'm happy to answer any last minute questions.
All right, well, if no one else has any other questions, thank you so much, Dr. Janiczek, for the wonderful presentation and for answering everybody's questions and for giving so much advice. Thank you all for attending today's event. We really appreciate it, and we hope you have a good night.
See you guys. Thanks.